Good afternoon and welcome to yet another installment of Government in Transition, a special program brought to you by the People's Progressive Party Civic. I am Michael Gordon. I am joined today by first PPPC national candidate, Mr. Anthony Vieira, and Mr. Vickchand Ramphal, PPPC candidate as well. Gentlemen, I welcome you both to this special program.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your program, Michael.
I'd like to welcome the viewers across Guyana and also those in the diaspora. If I may, and Tony, I'm going to begin with you. Let's jump straight into it and let's have some discussions on sanctions, what has happened in the last 24 to 36 hours as it relates to the announcement by the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada on personal sanctions of individuals who have been part and parcel of an effort to thwart the will of the people in our most recent regional and general election. Uh, there has been many utterances by key figures on the global stage, one of which is the Secretary of State of the United States, Mr. Mike Pompeo. We have had also the chair of CARICOM. We've had more recently the ambassador of the United States of America. All of this, however, has been met with resistance and also illogical reactions from emanating from the APNU AFC camp. But Tony, I'll ask you to speak to the issue of sanctions and what has happened in the past 36 hours.
Good afternoon to your viewers, Michael. As far as sanctions are concerned, I was doing some research within the last 24 hours, and the sanctions initially take the form of seizing and freezing financial accounts of various actors who the State Department visualize as being inimical to a democratic process in any particular country. We saw what happened in Venezuela, where they started with personal sanctions and then it went into the broader area where it's general sanctions. I think that Mr. Pompeo has made a very clear statement in that he and his government are totally dissatisfied with what they see happening here. And they have therefore begun the process of instituting individual sanctions against Guyanese who are participating in this electoral fraud. And in addition, he is warning that he could extend rather from rather imposing the sanctions on the individual person to his immediate family. So I welcome it myself because I think that it's time. After the CCJ ruling, everyone is now convinced and assured that what is being done here is wrong and has to be rectified. And they're doing it in no uncertain way. And happily, immediately after the US State Department Secretary made his announcement, the Brazilians have now stated that they are not in support of what they see going on. The British, the Canadians, and the European Union have all said that they're with us and they will be seeking to initiate sanctions against Guyana as well.
Tony, and Vic, I'm going to bring you in just now, but Tony, I also want you to I want you to pronounce on some of the reactions that we have been seeing coming from the APNU AFC camp, one of which is the move taken by the US and other countries is unjust since there has not been a declaration and the process, the electoral process has not completed. One would also know the utterances of hypocrisy from the standpoint that those are the same individuals who have done everything within their power to not just for the will of the people, but delay the declaration of the results and also attempt to alter the results.
I would have to go back a little to something that we supposed to know, apparently it's not generally known. When a country signs a charter or a treaty, it is obligated by the terms of the treaty and by national, international practice to come back to within their territory and jurisdiction and impose laws which support those agreements and charters that they've already signed. It's even in our 1980 Constitution, there are things in there because Forbes Burnham's government was a signatory to the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. It goes all the way back there, but in recent times, and based on what the current chairman of CARICOM is saying, we have in this, Guyana has signed 2 agreements which binds us to a democratic process. It's the Charter of Civil Society and the Treaty of Chaguaramas. These treaties and these covenants we have signed on to, the PNC just can't throw it out. The APNUAFC cannot just throw it out and say that people are interfering. To obtain these people's support, granted, and technical training, you are obligated to them for protecting you, and you have a right to enforce the covenants you've signed. These people, to get some oil, they want to throw everything that we have tried to achieve as a nation since independence out the window because they want to be the main leaders and movers in the world of oil. Well, clearly, based on the international reaction, it's not going to happen, but they're not giving up. These people's skin, like a rhinoceros, it is impervious to any kind of insult or bullet. I have never seen anything. I mean, if a man tell me he would castigate me like this publicly, I would run and hide. I wouldn't try to curse up the international community. And he has ticked off the chairman of the CARICOM. The man is calling them demonic clique. The chairman of CARICOM chair is calling Mr. Granger and his cohorts a demonic clique engaged in vile attempts to hijack the Guyana country. What else can we say, Michael?
Those are very strong words. I want Vickchand, sorry. I'm going to bring you in on the perspective of sanctions and the more from the standpoint of the back end of sanctions. I know you have studied in Cuba at the time that Caribbean island has been hit heavily by sanctions from the US and other countries. What is the experience like? And speak a bit on the whole notion of sanctions.
First, let me say good afternoon to all the viewers out there. And let me start by saying that Guyana cannot stand alone. We need all the CARICOM countries, the countries within the OAS, the European Union, and all the other countries for our development. And I've been hearing that persons from the coalition saying that the international community should get out of Guyana's business. Let me make it very clear that we cannot stand alone. And this is because, I am saying this because, as you rightly said, I studied in a country that is sanctioned by the US for many years. My experience there was one that really gave me that insight of how a country can be affected by being sanctioned. So in that country, basic things like foodstuff, and so on, medical stuff, are very scarce. You go into the supermarket, you cannot find certain things that you will find here in Guyana. And that is because there is very limited trade between Cuba and the United States of America. Also, when we look at other services and so on, for example, with electricity, sometimes there is blackout for hours. Many days during the week, we'll just have a few hours of electricity. And that is because Cuba does not have the resources to generate enough electricity for the entire population. Similarly, we will be faced with situation here, right? And so we do need the other countries out there to be strong with us, especially now that Guyana is on that road of being a member of the OPEC countries and so on. We need to have other countries to be part of us, so our resource, especially the oil, can be placed out there on the markets for us to really move forward. All right. So this whole thing about what they're saying is not only persons will be restricted to travel, but also our the entire population will be affected once the sanction is fully imposed on Guyana. My brothers and sisters out there, those of our hardworking people, all of us will be affected. So,
All right. Thanks, Vic, for that synopsis of the true essence and having lived in a country with sanctions. Tony, you touched on some of the comments by the chairman of CARICOM, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'll ask you to speak a bit more extensively on some of Dr. Gonzalez's utterances. He used the word brigand. Uh, it's a very strong word. In fact, many of his were strong words. Brigand refers to a member of a gang that ambushes and robs people. My definition says in the forest and elsewhere. Ambushing the population of Ghana and robbing them of their democratic right to elect a government of their choice. Do you see the synopsis between what he's saying and the reality on the ground?
Me?
Yes, Tony, you, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was. Let's quote directly from Mr. Gonzalez. This gentleman wrote and read his speech in which he says that notwithstanding rulings from the CCJ and other CARICOM entities, namely Mayor Motley and so on, the dangerous games continue to be played by a minority of persons associated with the political entity which has plainly lost the election. They are literally playing with fire, commotion, disorder, and civil war. I do not think that this man has overstated. If this continues, there is going to be a very serious situation developing in Guyana. And it reminds me of Mr. Rowley from Trinidad. He says, this is not going to end well. As I said before, Mike, I am totally astonished to find that these people, notwithstanding numerous checkmates in this ridiculous game they're playing, the gamesmanship that Mayor Motley spoke about, They refuse to accept the inevitable, which is they cannot be allowed to continue with this rate. They cannot be allowed. This hemisphere will not allow it. It's too close to the US, and there's already Cuba and there's already Venezuela, which is a big embarrassment to the Americans, and they certainly don't want another one developing, especially such a small player like Guyana. I have seen the writing on the wall from day one. I don't know why it's taking this long for these people to see it. But based on things that we have seen, the shenanigans which is going on in Gaisuko, Nisil, the hiding of property, the stealing of property, the selling and doing contracts by a government which has no legality at all at this time to initiate new projects. A caretaker government should really only be involved in routine work, not starting new contracts. The COVID hospital is a good example of waste, because essentially we have lost the fight with COVID-19. Within the last 2 weeks, we have had more recorded cases and more deaths than in the previous 3 months, because they've totally neglected to look at the interior regions to make sure that everybody there was following the guidelines of social distancing and so on. So we were surrounded by total incompetence at all time. If these people had paid this kind of attention to running this country from 2015 to now, they wouldn't have been. They might have been able to get reelected, but they can't, because they've failed miserably at everything. So I myself, I'm getting like Mr. Gonzalez now. I am totally dissatisfied and very unhappy with what's developed here. And I see that the possibility of them not accepting it could make this matter very much worse for all of us. Mr. Granger and his brigand band have to understand that when they are held up to the world and ridiculed like that, they're doing it to all Guyanese. We are not immune from it. All Guyanese. I have friends in Trinidad. I went to school in Trinidad for nearly 8 years. And I will tell you that my friends in Trinidad used to call me Mudhead. No, they call me something entirely different, because they figure that after our country has been the only English-speaking Caribbean country which has suffered the kinds of trauma which started with the PNC in the early days with Forbes Burnham and its own a new constitution and the only president within the entire Caribbean region. So, well, executive president, that is. So this is not new for Guyana to be in this situation. What is new in this situation is that they have tried to rig an election. They were caught red-handed because we have in place a system which works. And now they've put in place some arguments which defies all logic or comprehension or even believability to tell me that 115,000 dead people and migrated people voted in an election where when Mingo tried to just steal 15,000 votes, it was immediately discovered because the system is that good.
Vic, I'm going to bring you in on and Tony spoke to a number of issues about the scenario and the attempts to rig the elections. However, I would suppose that this was done with the mindset against the backdrop that APNU AFC had in their minds, which by now they should disabuse their minds from the notion that they're agents within the Guyana Elections Commission Secretariat and their commissioners were going to facilitate the rigging of such an election. And I'm speaking more specifically to the actions of one Keith Lowenfield, the chief elections officer, who continues to defy his employers.
Right. So on a number of occasions, we would have seen the CEO not presenting the rightful report that the chairman of the Guyana Election Commission would have requested him to. The most recent one, at the last meeting, I understand that the CEO walked out along with the three commissioners from the APNU. So that is showing clearly that there is collusion between the CEO and those of the government. When that happens, it put this country more into a state of depression. Our people across Guyana have been waiting patiently with the expectation that the CEO would have presented the rightful report that reflects the victory of the People's Progressive Party Civic. Because by now, the entire world knows that the PPPC won the elections. We had the recount after the doubts and the Mingo figures and so on. We had the national recount, which reflected the true numbers that shows a victory for the People's Progressive Party Civic. And there are thousands of Guyanese who are presently being affected by the actions of the CEO and those commissioners from the government side. Thousands of Guyanese, especially those who having a business, those that are engaged in economic activities. Presently, our economy is suffering a lot because of the action of these political players. And not only that, but let me also share with you one example here in region number 5 of how our farmers are being affected. You will know about the sea defense breach that exists in the Danzig Malponi area, right? Over the past few months, over $1.5 billion was spent on that project. But because of the government not monitoring properly, and because there is no legal government in place to allocate the necessary resources so as to put a proper fix to that structure, the area continues to be affected by flooding. And there is further breach on the sea defense that will affect other areas here in region number 5. And when low and feel, the APNUAFC, the commissioners of the government and the others continue to hold the country at ransom, our people continues to suffer. And so we need this whole scenario, this whole issue to come to an end. Let the People's Progressive Party Civic be installed into government as a new government, and so we can continue with the progress of this country and to fix all the problems that exist. So Mr. Lowenfield, he needs to come right. At the next meeting, he needs to come right, present the proper report, the report that reflects the will of the people, and let us move on as a country. Let us move on with the development of Guyana. It has been too long, 4 months and over, and we cannot get things in place. So I do believe that what they're doing there, of course, is affecting the people of Guyana, not only the supporters of the People's Progressive Party Civic, but every single Guyanese. Recently, I had discussion with some African brothers, and they themselves, they are tired and fed up of the situation. And they're saying that we need to move on. Guyana needs to move forward. And so the people at GCOM, especially the CEO, needs to do the right thing and stop being disrespectful to the chairman of the commission and being disrespectful to the people of Guyana.
Tony,
Mr. Llewellyn needs to stop this.
Tony, notwithstanding all the shenanigans, especially from the CEO, referred to by Vickchand, there continue and people's outcry and people's criticism of the CEO's action. There continues to be vile attacks on individuals who simply call for adherence to the rule of law, respecting the Constitution, and doing the right thing. In all quarters, every individual, almost or practically all, who have spoken out against such actions have come under some of the most naked, vile, and vulgar attacks. One of the most recent ugly scenes would have been an enacted funeral of the chairman of the commission, Justice retired Claudette Singh. When does it come to an end? And how do you describe President Granger's silence on such lawlessness in the context of his platform of decency?
That's now exploded. That myth has now been exploded. Anybody who doesn't believe that this man is part and parcel of this entire matter is really living in a dream. As far as I think that, again, I have to say that Mr. Gonzalez put it very nicely. These same vile and vulgar persons, having failed in their attempts to curse and bully Prime Minister Mia Mottley and former Prime Minister of Barbados Owen Arthur and me, have now turned their demonic attention to senior staff members of CARICOM and other reputable persons in Guyana and in the Caribbean community. None of us, that is very eloquent. I don't have to say anything else. It's unthinkable. I became a manager of a Booker's estate in 1976, Michael.
Tony, I've been hearing this story since 1997.
What? My manager?
Yes.
I became a manager at 32. I was very young. And I have been working as a manager and owner of my own business for a long time, many years, 40, 45 years. I can't figure out why my staff, having refused to carry out a legitimate instruction by me, why I have to tolerate him in the business. I would say to him, listen, chap, if you see you on this premises 15 minutes from now, I'll call in the police because you're trespassing on private property. I'll throw you, not only fire you, I'll throw you out the gate. And I did it more than once. I just don't get it. I don't understand it. How any legitimate manager could take a subordinate being totally disregarding legitimate orders like this. I can't understand it. As an old manager from way back, I just can't get it. Answer you?
Yes, your closing thoughts, or we're practically out of time, but your closing thoughts on the, of course, you must be, as a true patriot, you must be optimistic about the way forward, though there is a court matter, seemingly of very little or, well, no substance before the High Court in this point in time. I don't want us to try the case here on this program, but in the context of an existing matter, speak to how confident you are that we are going to get over this hurdle sometime in the near future. Your closing comments in this regard.
Well, I have no doubt in my mind, because she has established very clearly for all of us that we, for the first time in a very long time, have a legitimate Chief Justice. Even though acting, she has legitimately been ruling properly in most of the cases that we have been following. On the other hand, if she rules against these people, as I am quite sure she will, not to be prejudicial to anything, but it would probably have to go to the appeal court, in which case anything could happen. And I leave it there. Because I was once charged for contempt of court by Carl Singh, and I wouldn't want to be in that boat again. So I'll leave it there. It's going to go to the appeal court. And we're going to go through more shenanigans again, I guess, because they have not established that they're have much credibility. 2 or 3 times in major cases, they have actually tried to distort the Constitution to make rulings, which is unbelievable.
Vickchand, your closing comments in terms of your optimism, notwithstanding what seems to be a paucity of merits of the existing case.
I'm very confident that we will be, vindicated at the end, because from the previous matters that went before the court, is the coalition, the APNUAFC, they do not have anything in substance, and it's just they're just doing it, to my mind, they're doing it to buy more time, to maybe spend a few more days in government. But we will all get over this.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Vickchand Ramphal, PPPC candidate, and Mr. Anthony Vieira, also a candidate of the People's Progressive Party Civic. Thank you both for being a part of this program.
Thank you very much for having me on your program.
Thank you, Michael.
I am Michael Gordon, and this has been Government in Transition, a special program brought to you by the People's Progressive Party Civic. Join you, Todd, my colleague, at 4 p.m. for another installment of this special program. To our viewers and listeners, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.